Okay, so let's get into the claims. So we have four claims, and we have four claims plus the 10-minute claim of the debater's choice at the end. So the first claim is incentive is the engine of capitalism, remove it and the system fails. So I actually struggled with this one because I wanted to know more about what an incentive was. And so an incentive is a thing that motivates or encourages one to do something, typically by offering a reward or a benefit. So here they're talking about a profit incentive to do something. So you do something, in other words, to earn money or to generate money. And so they were really clashing here with the idea of people needing to work for incentive. The biggest incentive is obviously money and social standing, in my opinion. So people are saying, there was one guy who was saying that incentives are basically born out of scarcity, not capitalism. So you work for the things that you don't have. And I think that makes sense because you need to work in order to get money, and then you need to use that money to buy things that you do not have or things that you want more of. So I don't feel like that counters the claim that was being made. Any reason that you are working is evidence that you need to have a motivation to work in order for capitalism to thrive and succeed and all of that stuff. Because if you have people who just don't want to work, that means that jobs are not going to get filled, roles are not going to get filled, and then you don't have anything to keep the business going. So you have to have some motivation for people to work, and people are always going to work for money because you use money to get other things. And this is something that came up a lot. People are talking about single mothers and other people having to work multiple jobs. PBD basically said that for some women, this is kind of a failure on their end because of the choices that they made. And so I do want to play a clip on someone talking about having to work multiple jobs just to exist.
The primary incentives are either greed, amass as much personal wealth as you possibly can.
You think that's the problem? It's greed?
Yeah, exactly. And
like you're not greedy at all.
And like you said, survival.
Yeah.
Right? The person, working 5 jobs, that they're doing that to survive.
Sure.
They wouldn't want to do that if they didn't need to survive. But that's such a horrible dystopian world to live in. If someone has to work 5 jobs just to survive.
Okay, so there was a lot that was said there, and I'm not sure how much of it I agree with. So I do agree that no one should have to work 5 jobs to succeed, but why exactly is someone working 5 jobs? Are they working 5 jobs because they want to make as much money as they can, or are they working 5 jobs because each job pays so little that they need the income that comes from all 5 jobs just to be able to have enough income to sustain their lifestyle and to meet their basic needs? So I'm not sure that I like this example because yes, there are people who work multiple jobs. There are multiple rich people, millionaires who have multiple jobs because the whole thing is about generating income and generating passive income so that you don't have to work as hard. And you have to get to a position where you can get to that even level where you don't need to work as many jobs or you don't have to do as much to generate a profit. There are things that are passively working in the background to generate money for you. And so the thing that I have an issue with here is that I don't know that it's necessary that someone has to work 5 jobs in order to survive. I don't even know how it's possible to work 5 jobs in a 24-hour time period. So I don't even know what that person's schedule looks like. Are these part-time jobs, or how is that even working? Are you working 2 jobs at once? That's crazy. I know that people have done that, especially during the pandemic, where you're not like having to go into the office all day, where people can actually see what you're doing. And so I don't know that is on the system necessarily, that someone has to work 5 jobs. I think it's all about you and your needs and what you want for yourself, and that determines what kind of jobs you work and how many jobs you work in order to be able to take care of yourself. And so I think the idea that we are just alive and that we should be, entitled to certain things. Yes, we should have certain things. We should be able to work, we should be able to pursue happiness, we should be able to buy property, and we should also not be forced to do things that we don't want to do in terms of the government making us do those things or other people making us do those things. But I do think that you have the choice whether or not you work, and there's consequences of not working. If you don't work, you don't make money, and if you don't have money, you don't get your bills paid. So my point is, I think that modern society has made it to where we value convenience over learning how to do things for ourselves. And because back in the day, it used to be super easy. All you had to do was know how to hunt, how to fish, and you could literally get your own food without needing money. You just needed to find the materials to make a spear, all of that stuff, and then you had to work for the fish. You had to stand in the water and wait for your opportunity to strike and catch fish. And so I think that when you bring money into the equation, that adds that extra step of you being able to get to what you need because you need money. You now need money in order to buy the spear, in order to hunt. You just want things that are more convenient. And I think that is why we have the society that we have now, because cash literally is the root of everything. The other thing that came up was the idea of market rates for a specific job or an industry. And I think that this is pretty fair, especially when you think about there being multiple positions for a specific role within a company. So if you have Chipotle and they have multiple franchises all over the country, because you need so many workers to fill each restaurant, that also drives down the hourly wage for those roles, because you can't pay every Chipotle worker who works in the store a $70K salary. Like, you probably could, but that means that the people at the top would need to make less money in order to be able to pass that money down to the people in the stores. And whether or not people are going to do that, I don't know. That's just a suggestion, an idea. But I think that because you have so many roles that need to be filled, that makes the distribution of money and salary a little bit more difficult, just because of how many people are involved at that point. One thing that came up was that America was not really based on a meritocracy, and this is basically the criticism that some people are born into wealth and other people aren't. So some people have an advantage and other people do not. And I don't know if that's necessarily fair to say that just because someone is born into generational wealth that there isn't a meritocracy, because an individual at some point had to work for that money, and they got to a point where they amassed so much wealth that they were able to pass it down. But that individual, they still have to go out and generate their own wealth and their own name for themselves. That's why you hear about people who say, hey, I didn't get a trust fund or whatever, and they have to go out into the world and make their own money. And yes, at some point they may be able to rely on the family money, but there are a lot of rich people and millionaires who are like, hey, I'm not leaving anything to my kid. They need to work for it. And so I don't think that just because someone has money that's passed down, that means that people didn't work for that money based on merit. It just means that there is so much wealth that it was able to be passed down. And I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing that some people have an advantage and other people don't, because even if money wasn't involved, your circumstances in life also matter, because where you're born matters, the people around you matter, and then also the environment that you're in matters. So if you are born into a family that lives in a rural area, you're obviously not going to have the same opportunity as someone who is born in an average family who lives in the city, just because those opportunities are different. And so it's not necessarily about money, but it's just about the opportunities that you have based on who your family members are and the opportunities around you. And I don't think that that's necessarily tied to money. You can have an average life and know a lot of people. That's called networking. And because you know so many people, you're able to create all of these different opportunities for yourself. And I don't think that that's explicitly tied to money. Okay, so we're getting into the kind of crazier part of this conversation. There was a girl named Zena who came up, and she was basically talking about intrinsic incentives, and she was basically talking about passion is also what drives people to do a lot of the jobs that they have and to create innovation and all of that stuff. And to me, she was just saying so much at this point that was hard to follow, but it basically sounded like what she was talking about was a hobby. So there are people who have hobbies, they do things that they're passionate about, and there are people who do hobbies just because it's something they're passionate about. It's not something that they plan to make a profit off of or anything like that. And there's other people who turn their hobbies into things that they can make a profit from. And I don't think that that's bad necessarily, but for people who genuinely just have a hobby, they have to supplement their hobby with something that actually pays the bill. So like if you have an artist who enjoys painting and they're not making any money from it, yes, they can live a lifestyle where they just paint, they don't have a whole lot of money, they're called a struggling artist in that sense, but if they want to be able to continue painting, they may get a job that pays their bills so that in their spare time they can just paint and do the things that they're passionate about. And so I don't think that people just create things out of passion. I think there is a motivation behind it. Yes, you may want a hobby to distract you from your stressful work life or your stressful family life, and then you may want a hobby because you eventually want to use that for profit. And so I think what we're getting down to is that nobody can just do something because they're passionate about it without money being involved if they want to survive. And I think it came up earlier where someone was talking about people doing charity work as a form of kind of like intrinsic incentive. There are people who volunteer their time and they want to give back by donating their time to charity or helping others who are not as fortunate as they are. And so I think that that's totally fine, and what you get out of that is the personal satisfaction of knowing that you've donated your time. But at the same time, in order for you to be able to do that, you need to have some sort of financial security that you can spend time out of your day doing something like that where you don't earn money from that. And I don't think it's a bad thing if you do spend your time donating to charities or donating your time to charity and you don't have a job or anything like that. You are able to kind of trade, work off your debts. Like say, for example, if you get a meal at a restaurant, but then you say, hey, I can't pay for this, but I'll do the dishes. You're able to trade and bargain in that way. But for the most part, I don't think that people are able to just do things out of passion without meeting their basic needs. So I think a lot of that is tied into having hobbies and whether or not you at some point plan to change your hobby into something for profit.